Randolph Scott truly hated him more than anyone. Randolph Scott was born George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898 in Orange County, Virginia. He grew up in a large Gentile Southern family that valued discipline, education, and integrity, traits that would later define both his screen presence and personal character. His father, George Randolph Scott, was a well-respected textile executive, while his mother, Lucilla Randolph Scott, was known for her refinement and gentility. Randolph was the second of 7 children, and his upbringing in Charlotte, North Carolina, fostered a sense of quiet confidence and moral uprightness that would later become central to his film persona. Educated first at private schools and later at Georgia Institute of Technology and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, he initially planned to follow in his father's footsteps in business or engineering. However, Fateen Hollywood had other plans. Scott's path to stardom was not immediate. After serving with distinction in World War I as an artillery officer in France, he returned to civilian life with a renewed sense of purpose. In the early 1920s, while visiting California, he became captivated by the film industry that was blossoming there. With his tall, athletic build, striking features, and southern charm, he caught the attention of several casting directors. He began his acting career humbly, working as an extra and stuntman before landing small speaking roles. His early efforts were marked by perseverance and humility, traits that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. By the late 1920s, he had found steady work in Hollywood and soon transitioned into talking pictures, where his deep, resonant voice gave him a commanding presence. Throughout the 1930s and 1942, Randolph Scott's career flourished. He appeared in a variety of genres from comedies to dramas, but it was the Western that really made him a legend with films such as The Last of the Mohicans, 1936, Western Union, 1941, and The Desperado 1943. Scott became synonymous with the quintessential Western hero, stoic, honorable, and unyielding in the face of adversity. His characters embodied a moral code rooted in decency and courage, reflecting his own real-life demeanor. Unlike many of his peers, Scott avoided the pitfalls of celebrities. He was known for his professionalism, quiet demeanor, and steadfast dedication to his craft. His collaboration with director Bud Bodker during the 1950s resulted in some of the finest westerns ever made, including Sieve Men From Now, 1956, Ride Lonesome, 1959, and Comanche Station, 1960. These films, now regarded as masterpieces, portrayed Scott as a man of action, haunted by past regrets, yet guided by an unshakable moral compass. Scott's influence extended far beyond his final film appearance in Ride the High Country, 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that film, he portrayed an aging lawman struggling to uphold his principles in a changing world, a role that mirrored his own graceful exit from Hollywood. When he retired, he did so at the height of his dignity, choosing to leave the screen on his own terms. He invested wisely in real estate and business ventures, eventually becoming one of the wealthiest actors of his era. Yet, despite his financial success, he remained modest, grounded, and focused on his family and faith. Randolph Scott married twice during his lifetime, and both unions revealed different facets of his personality, one marked by high society and the other by quiet domestic content. His first marriage took place in 1936 when he wed heiress Marianne DuPont, a woman whose family name carried immense prestige in American industrial and social circles. Marianne was the daughter of William DuPont Sr., a member of the wealthy and influential DuPont dynasty and the great-granddaughter of Eluderne Dupont de Neers, the French-born chemist and entrepreneur who founded a Dupont de Neers and Company, one of the most powerful industrial corporations in American history. Through this marriage, Scott entered a world of inherent wealth and old money privilege vastly different from his modest upbringing in North Carolina. Marianne DuPont herself was a fascinating and accomplished woman, not merely an ace, but an independent, strong-willed equestrian with a deep passion for horse breeding and racing. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia estate that had once been the home of President James Madison, and she transformed it into a world-class horse breeding and training facility. Before marrying Scott, Marianne had been wed to George Somerville, a Virginia sportsman, and interestingly, Randolph Scott had served as best man at their wedding. This peculiar connection added an unusual twist to their latter relationship, suggesting that their bond developed gradually and perhaps in nexity from friendship into romance. However, despite the glamour that surrounded their union, the marriage between Scott and Marion DuPont was not destined to last. Their worlds, though both privileged, were starkly different. Scott, at that time an emerging Hollywood star, was focused on building his acting career in California, while Marion was deeply rooted in her equestrian pursuits and the social traditions of the East Coast. The couple often found themselves living apart, separated by both geography and le festal. In 1939, just 3 years after their wedding, their marriage ended in divorce. Although the union produced no children, the separation was reportedly amicable. Interestingly, Marion continued to use the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, keeping his surname for nearly 5 decades until her death in 1983. This enduring choice reflected perhaps a lingering fondness or respect between the two, or simply her desire to preserve a name that had come to define her public identity within the world of horse racing and philanthropy. After several years of bachelorhood, Randolph Scott found lasting happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he wed Patricia Stillman, a beautiful actress who was 21 years his junior. Patricia had briefly appeared in films during the 1940 seconds, but after her marriage to Scott, she devoted herself primarily to family life. Their relationship stood in stark contrast to Scott's earlier, more socially strategic union with Marianne DuPont. This time, the marriage seemed rooted in genuine affection and shared values. The couple settled into a comfortable and enduring domestic life, shunning much of the Hollywood spotlight so often consumed celebrity marriages of the era. In 1950, Randolph and Patricia expanded their family by adopting 2 children, a daughter named Sandra and a son named Christopher. Scott, who had built his screen image as a rugged and stoic Western hero, was by all accounts a devoted and gentle father. Friends and colleagues often remarked on the warmth of his home life and the strong bond he shared with his wife and children. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Scott managed to maintain a stable marriage free from scandal or public turmoil, and his family life became one of the cornerstones of his later happiness. Randolph and Patricia's marriage lasted for 4 decades until his death in 1987, and it remained one of Hollywood's greater success stories, away from the bright lights of the film industry. The Scotts lived a serene life, splitting their time between their home in Beverly Hills and their ranch near Santa Barbara, where Randolph could indulge his lifelong love of horses and the open countryside. Through this enduring partnership, Scott found the kind of stability and peace that had eluded him in his first marriage, a tranquil domestic world that mirrored the strong, dependable characters he so often portrayed on screen. In the world of Hollywood westerns, few figures loomed as large as Randolph Scott and John Wayne. Both were towering icons of rugged masculinity, each embodying a different kind of heroism on screen. Yet behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. While fans often assumed that such similar stars would share mutual respect, the truth was far more complex. Randolph Scott, the refined Southern gentleman with impeccable manners and a quiet sense of dignity, harbored a deep and lasting dislike for John Wayne. Their differences went beyond professional rivalry. They were rooted in personality, values, and the way each man viewed the art of acting and the code of the cowboy. "I never cared for the man," Scott once said bluntly. He represented everything in Hollywood didn't admire. Scott had always prided himself on restraint, both on and off the screen. His performances were measured, deliberate, and quietly powerful. He didn't need to shout or swagger to convey strength. John Wayne, on the other hand, was the embodiment of bravado, boisterous, loud, and commanding attention wherever he went. Wayne was a showman, Scott remarked. Andy was a craftsman. There's a difference, Scott. Wayne's brand of heroism felt theatrical, almost exaggerated. He saw Wayne as a product of Hollywood myth-making rather than the disciplined storytelling that Scott valued. Behind the polished image of the Duke, Scott saw what he called a salesman's version of the West, more focused on image than integrity. Their professional paths crossed occasionally, though never in a direct rivalry on film. However, the undercurrent of competition was undeniable. Both were leading men in westerns throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and producers often compared their box office draws. "The studios tried to pit us against each other," Scott recalled. "But the truth is, we never needed to be compared. We were playing 2 different games." Scott's films often carried a moral subtlety, a sense of internal struggle and reflection, while Wayne's movies thrived in spectacle and patriotic fervor. Scott found that approach shallow. "I played men who questioned theocracies," he said. Wayne played men who never questioned anything. Beyond artistic disagreements, their personalities clashed. Scott was known for his calm, gentlemanly demeanor, rarely raising his voice or boasting about his success. Wayne, conversely, was loud and politically outspoken, often dominating conversations with his conservative views and bombastic confidence. He liked to talk politics and war. Scott once remarked, "Two things I never believed should be glorified in a saloon or on a soundstage: Wayne's self-assured patriotism." Sufton expressed in black and white moral terms deeply irritated Scott, who believed life, like the frontier, was full of gray areas. Their opposing temperaments meant that any meeting between them often ended in tinselance or cutting remarks. There were also personal slights that widened their rift. On several occasions, Scott reportedly felt disrespected by Wayne's offhand comments about his acting style. Wayne, known for his bluntness, once referred to Scott as "too pretty to play a real cowboy." Scott never forgot that insult. He thought being loud made him authentic. Scott later said he thought being real meant being quiet. Even within Hollywood circles, people knew that Scott would politely leave a party if Wayne arrived. Their mutual acquaintance, actors like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea, were often caught in the middle, careful not to praise one man in front of the other. Yet, perhaps the deepest root of Scott's dislike came from what he perceived as hypocrisy. Wayne, despite his on-screen image as a fearless hero, had avoided military service during World War II, a decision that many in Hollywood quietly resented. Scott, who supported the war effort in other ways and held a lifelong respect for soldiers, saw this as a moral failure. "I didn't judge men who stayed home," Scott said, "but I couldn't match those who pretended to fight wars on screen after refusing to serve in one." To Scott, that contradiction defined Wayne's character. A man more concerned with appearances than principles. Despite his dislike, Scott never launched public attacks or sought to tarnish Wayne's legacy. His disdain was private, revealed only in candid interviews late in life. "I respected his success," Scott admitted, "but I never respected the man." The Western legends remained professional, their paths rarely crossing after the 1950s. Yet their silent feud became part of Hollywood folklore. For all their differences, both men shaped the Western genre in profound ways. Scott threw quiet dignity and moral complexity, Wayne threw larger-than-life heroism. Ironically, their contrast may have been what kept the genre balanced. Still, in Randolph Scott's heart, there was no affection, no camaraderie, only a deep and abiding dislike. "John Wayne," he once said with a cold finality, "was the last man I'd ride the range with." Randolph Scott died of heart and lung ailments in 1987 at the age of 89 in Beverly Hills, California. He was interred at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. He and his wife Patricia had been married for 43 years. She died in 2004 and is buried next to her husband. The mid-century modern home was torn down in 2008. The Randolph Scott papers, which included photos, scrapbooks, notes, letters, articles, and house plans, were left to the UCLA Library Special Collections.